It was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons in late spring when the sun hung high but not too hot, and the air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass and blooming lilacs. Heritage Park nestled in the heart of Oak Ridge, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood known for its tidy sidewalks, manicured lawns, and neighbors who waved from their porches, was buzzing with the usual weekend energy. Kids chased soccer balls across the green fields. Parents sat on folding chairs sipping iced tea, and a few teenagers lounged near the picnic tables, laughing over snacks. Near the edge of the main field, away from the noise but still within sight, a 16-year-old boy sat alone on a wooden bench under the shade of an old oak tree. He wore dark jeans, a plain gray hoodie, and wireless earbuds tucked into his ears. In his lap rested a worn sketchbook, its corners bent from frequent use. His pencil moved slowly, carefully tracing the curve of his little sister's ponytail as she ran drills with her team. He wasn't drawing from memory. He was watching her, capturing the way her arms swung when she sprinted, the determined set of her jaw. He'd promised her he'd be there, and he always kept his promises. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't loud. He wasn't even looking up much, just glancing every few seconds to check her position, then returning to his sketch. But to some people, simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time while looking a certain way was enough to raise suspicion. Across the park, near the community garden gate, a woman in her early 50s stood with her arms crossed, watching him. She'd lived in Oak Ridge for over 20 years. She knew every neighbor by name, organized the annual block party, and had once led a campaign to install better streetlights after a string of minor break-ins years ago. She prided herself on being aware and proactive. Today, she'd come to the park to walk her small terrier, but the dog was now dozing in the stroller at her feet while she scanned the area like a sentry. Something about the boy on the bench didn't sit right with her. He was alone. He was wearing a hoodie even though it wasn't cold. He hadn't spoken to anyone. And though she wouldn't admit this even to herself, he was black in a neighborhood where most faces were white. She told herself it wasn't about race, it was about safety. You never know these days, she'd say later if asked. Better safe than sorry. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, dialing 911 with the confidence of someone who believed she was doing the right thing. Hi, yes. I need to report a suspicious person at Heritage Park, she said, voice low but urgent. He's just sitting there, not moving, wearing a hoodie. Looks like he might be watching the houses on Maple Street. Big guy, maybe late teens. I don't recognize him. Could be casing the neighborhood. The dispatcher asked for more details, height, clothing, behavior. She gave what she could, embellishing slightly. He keeps looking around like he's nervous. Yeah, definitely not from around here. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled into the park, tires crunching softly on the gravel path. The officers stepped out, both in uniform, both calm but alert. They spotted the boy immediately. One approached from the front, the other circled slightly to the side, a standard tactic. The boy looked up as their shadows fell over his sketchbook. He pulled out one earbud, blinking in the sunlight. Afternoon, the first officer said, hand resting lightly near his belt. Can we see some ID? The boy hesitated. He wasn't scared exactly, more confused. Why? I didn't do anything. Just routine, the officer replied, though his tone suggested it wasn't. You're sitting alone, matching a description we got of someone acting suspicious. I'm waiting for my sister, the boy said, nodding toward the soccer field, where a group of girls in blue jerseys were lining up for penalty kicks. She's number 7. Game ends in 20 minutes. Name? The second officer asked, pulling out a small notepad. Malik, he said. Malik Johnson. Last name again. Johnson. The officers exchanged a glance. The name didn't ring any bells. You live around here? Couple blocks over, Malik said, pointing vaguely east. On Sycamore. Got ID on you? Malik sighed, but reached into his back pocket and pulled out his school ID. It had his photo, name, and grade. Nothing official, but it was something. The officer studied it, then handed it back slowly. You mind if we take a look at your bag? The first officer asked. I don't have a bag, Malik said, holding up his sketchbook. Just this. Let's see it. Malik hesitated again. This felt wrong. He hadn't broken any rules. He was just sitting, but he knew better than to argue too hard. He handed over the sketchbook. The officer flipped through a few pages, mostly drawings of his sister, his mom, cityscapes from school trips. Nothing threatening. Still, he held on to it. "Why'd someone call about you?" the officer asked, voice softer now but still firm. "I don't know," Malik said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Maybe because I'm black and sitting on a bench?" The officer didn't respond. He just glanced toward the community garden where the woman was now pretending to inspect tomato plants, though her eyes kept darting back to them. Just then, a small voice cut through the tension. "Malik!" A girl in a blue soccer jersey came sprinting across the grass, her ponytail bouncing, face flushed from running. She skidded to a stop beside him, eyes wide with panic. "Are you okay?" "Why are they talking to you?" she demanded, turning to the officers with a mix of fear and anger that only a 12-year-old protective sister could muster. "I'm fine, Allie," Malik said gently, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Just waiting for you." But Allie wasn't having it. "He's my brother." "He's been here the whole time." "He's drawing me." She pointed at the sketchbook in the officer's hand. "Give it back." The second officer crouched slightly to her level. "We're just checking things out, sweetheart. No need to worry." But Allie wasn't sweetening. "My mom's gonna be here soon." "She's gonna be mad." At that, Malik's stomach dropped, not because he was in trouble, but because he knew exactly how his mom would react, and he didn't want her to have to deal with this. Not today, not ever. Back near the garden, the woman watched the scene unfold. She felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe she'd overreacted, but then she reminded herself, you can't be too careful. She'd done her civic duty. That was all. Meanwhile, Malik stood up slowly, keeping Allie close. "Look," he said to the officers, voice steady now. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not resisting. But I don't have to stand here while you treat me like a criminal just because someone got nervous seeing me sit down." The officers exchanged another look. They weren't bad guys. They were trained to respond to calls, to assess threats. But this didn't feel like a threat. It felt off. Before they could respond, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot at the edge of the park. It wasn't flashy, just a clean government-issued vehicle with tinted windows. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a navy pantsuit, low heels, and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and though she looked tired, like she'd just come from a long meeting, her posture was straight, her expression calm but focused. She scanned the park, spotted her children, and her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the scene. 2 officers, her son standing tall but tense, her daughter clinging to his arm. She walked toward them with purpose, not rushing but not hesitating either. People nearby noticed her. Some recognized her from local news, others just sensed authority in her stride. As she drew closer, the officers straightened instinctively. Something about her presence commanded respect. "Officers," she said, voice clear and calm. "What seems to be the problem here?" The first officer blinked. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual." "My son?" She interrupted, not unkindly, but with steel underneath. "Yes, ma'am. We were just verifying. His name is Malik Johnson," she said. "He's 16. He's been here for his sister's soccer game. He carries a sketchbook, not a weapon. And he lives 2 blocks away." She held out her hand. "Governor Elena Johnson." "I assume you've heard of me." The officers froze. One of them actually took a half step back. The other stammered, "Governor, we didn't." "No," she said gently but firmly, "you didn't." She turned to Malik, her expression softening for just a second, long enough for him to see the worry in her eyes before turning back to the officers. "I appreciate you responding to a call, but I'd like to know who made it, and on what grounds my son was deemed suspicious for sitting on a public bench in broad daylight." The officers looked toward the garden. The woman who had been watching suddenly turned and began pushing her dog stroller quickly toward the exit, head down. "Ma'am," the governor called out, not loudly, but with enough volume to carry. "Could you please wait a moment?" The woman stopped. Slowly she turned. Her face was pale. She recognized the governor instantly, not just from TV, but from a recent town hall she'd attended. Her stomach twisted. The governor walked over, stopping a few feet away. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply asked, "Did you call the police about my son?" The woman swallowed. I didn't know he was yours. He looked out of place." You thought what?" The governor asked, still calm. "That a black teenager sitting quietly in a public park must be up to no good?" That he couldn't possibly belong here? The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. No excuse sounded right now. The governor nodded as if she'd expected that. Next time, she said quietly. Instead of calling the police on a child, maybe try saying hello. She turned and walked back to her kids. She put an arm around each of them, pulled them close for a brief, tight hug, less for comfort, more for solidarity, and said, "Let's go home." As they walked to the car, Malik kept his head down. Allie chattered nervously, asking if they were in trouble, if the police would come to their house. "No, baby," the governor said. "We're not in trouble. But someone else might be, if they keep treating people like suspects just because of how they look." Back at the park, the officers stood in silence for a long moment. One finally said, "Man, that was the governor's kid?" The other just shook his head. "Yeah, and we almost arrested him for drawing his sister." They got in their cruisers and drove off, the weight of the moment settling heavily between them. And the woman? She went home, shut the door, and sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone. She didn't post about it. She didn't call friends to explain. She just sat there replaying the governor's words in her head. Instead of calling the police on a child, maybe try saying hello. For the first time in years, she wondered if being proactive sometimes just meant being afraid of the wrong things. Meanwhile, in the SUV, Malik stared out the window, sketchbook back in his lap. His mom reached over and squeezed his knee. "You handled yourself well," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It shouldn't have to be like this." "No," she agreed. "It shouldn't." And in that quiet car ride home, with the hum of the engine and the distant cheers from the soccer field fading behind them, a mother and her son sat with the heavy truth that even in 2024, simply existing while black could still feel like a risk, and that sometimes the only shield you had was the love and presence of someone who refused to let the world treat you as less than you were. The moment the black SUV pulled away from Heritage Park, the air in the neighborhood seemed to shift. It wasn't just the usual Saturday calm, it was heavier, charged with something unspoken. People who'd been watching from a distance slowly turned back to their picnics or their kids' games, but they talked in hushed tones. A few pulled out their phones not to call anyone, but to scroll through what they'd recorded. One woman replayed the clip she'd taken, the governor stepping out calm but firm, her son standing tall despite everything, the way the officers' faces changed when they realized who they were dealing with. She didn't post it right away. She just watched it again, her stomach tight with unease. Back at the Johnson house, a modest but well-kept home on Sycamore Street with a small front porch and flower boxes under the windows, the mood was quiet but not calm. Inside, Malik sat at the kitchen table, still in his hoodie, sketchbook open but untouched. His little sister, Allie, paced the living room like a tiny storm cloud, muttering about how unfair it all was. Their mom stood at the sink rinsing a glass, her back to them. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. But the way her shoulders were set, the slight tension in her jaw, Malik knew that look. It was the same look she got before big speeches or tough meetings. The look that said, "This ends now." She turned off the faucet and dried her hands slowly. Then she walked over and sat across from Malik. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. He shrugged. "Yeah, just tired." "Tired of what?" "Tired of having to prove I belong everywhere I go," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "I wasn't doing anything. I was drawing Ali, and some lady saw me and decided I was dangerous." His mom nodded. She didn't offer empty comfort like, "It'll get better," or "People are just scared." She knew better. Instead, she said, "You didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing." Allie came in and flopped into a chair. "I told them you were my brother. I even showed them your drawing of me. They didn't care." "They cared," their mom said gently, "but not enough to question why they were there in the first place." She stood up again and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Oak Ridge wasn't a bad place. It had good schools, safe parks, neighbors who brought casseroles when someone was sick. But safety, she knew, wasn't evenly shared. For some, it came with the color of their skin, the sound of their last name, the way they dressed. For others, like her son, it had to be earned over and over even when you did everything right. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it. A text from her chief of staff. "Did you hear what happened at Heritage Park?" There's video already, she sighed. Of course there was. She picked up the phone and typed back, "Yes, I was there." Within minutes, her phone started ringing. News stations, reporters, even the mayor. She let them go to voicemail. Right now, she wasn't Governor Johnson. She was just Mom, but she knew that wouldn't last long. Meanwhile, across town, the woman who'd made the call sat alone in her sunlit living room. Her dog napped on the rug. The house was clean, quiet, peaceful, the way she liked it. But peace felt fragile now. She kept replaying the governor's words. Instead of calling the police on a child, maybe try saying hello. They echoed in her head like a warning bell. She hadn't meant harm. She truly believed she was protecting her neighborhood. But now, sitting with the silence, doubt crept in. Had she really seen something suspicious, or had she just seen a black boy and assumed the worst? She thought about her own son away at college. What if someone called the cops on him just for sitting somewhere? The thought made her chest tighten. She opened her laptop and typed Heritage Park into the search bar. Nothing yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. By early evening, it happened. A local news station posted a short clip titled, "Teen Questioned in Oak Ridge Park, Mother Intervenes." It didn't name anyone, but the footage was clear. The governor's face, her son's hoodie, the officer's hesitation. Within an hour, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in, some supportive, some angry, some defending the caller. She was just being cautious. Others fired back. Cautious of what? A kid with a sketchbook? The woman closed her laptop. Her hands were shaking. Back at the Johnson house, dinner was quiet. Pasta, garlic bread, salad, Malik's favorite. But no one had much appetite. After they ate, their mom cleared the table and sat with them in the living room. "I need to talk to you both," she said. "This is going to get bigger. People are going to talk. Some will say I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Others will say I should have stayed quiet. But I can't do that. Not when it's about you." Malik looked down. "Do you have to make it public?" "I don't want to be a story." "I know," she said softly. "But sometimes your story helps other kids who've been through the same thing feel less alone. And maybe, just maybe, it makes someone think twice before calling the police on a child who's just existing." Allie piped up. "Will that lady get in trouble?" "I don't know," their mom admitted. "Calling 911 isn't illegal. But using it as a tool to police people who look different, that's a problem. And we need to talk about it." She didn't say she'd press charges. She didn't threaten. She just said they'd respond with truth and with purpose. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, she sat at her desk and drafted a statement. Not a fiery rant, not a political speech, just a mother's words. "Today, my son was treated as a suspect for sitting in a public park while waiting for his sister's soccer game. He carried a sketchbook, not a weapon. He was calm, respectful, and innocent. Yet 2 police officers were called because someone felt uncomfortable seeing him there. This is not an isolated incident. It happens to black and brown children every day, in parks, in stores, in their own neighborhoods. It chips away at their sense of safety, their trust in systems meant to protect everyone equally. I'm grateful the officers handled the situation professionally once they understood the facts. But the real issue isn't just how police respond, it's why these calls happen in the first place. We must ask ourselves, who do we see as belonging? And who do we see as a threat, simply for being present? She sent it to her team with instructions. Release it first thing in the morning. She didn't sleep much that night. She checked on Malik twice, standing in his doorway, watching him breathe. He looked so young in the dim light, too young to carry this weight. By sunrise, the story had exploded. National news outlets picked it up. Headlines read, "Governor's son targeted in racial profiling incident," and "He was just drawing. Family speaks out after police called on teen." Social media lit up. Hashtags like "Charn sketchbook not suspicious" and "Let him sit" trended locally. Teachers, parents, even police reform advocates shared their own stories of being followed in stores, stopped for fitting a description, questioned for walking home. The woman who made the call saw it all. Her phone buzzed nonstop, neighbors, old friends, even her book club group. Some messages were kind. "I know you didn't mean harm." Others were harsh. "How could you?" One person posted her address online. She saw it on a forum and immediately called the police for a welfare check. Officers came, took a report, told her to stay inside. She felt like a prisoner in her own home. She thought about calling the governor to apologize. But what would she even say? Sorry I treated your son like a criminal? The words felt too small for the damage done. At the state capitol, the governor's office was flooded with calls, some supportive, some furious. A few conservative commentators accused her of playing the race card and using her son for political gain. But others, including law enforcement leaders, reached out privately to say this needed to be said. That afternoon, the governor held an impromptu press gaggle on the Capitol steps. Not a formal press conference, just a few minutes with reporters who'd gathered. She wore a simple blouse, no jacket, her hair loose. She looked tired but resolute. I'm not here as a politician today, she began. I'm here as a mother. My son did nothing wrong, and yet he was made to feel like he didn't belong in his own community. That's not okay, and it's not rare. A reporter asked, will you be pressing charges against the caller? No, she said. This isn't about punishment. It's about understanding. We live in a system where fear is often directed at the wrong people. Until we fix that, these moments will keep happening. Another asked, what do you want to see change? I want people to question their first instinct, she said. If you see someone who looks out of place, ask yourself, why do I think that? Is it because of their skin, their clothes, or just because they're different from you? And then, instead of calling 911, try a smile. Try a hello. Try seeing them as human first. Her words spread fast. Even people who didn't agree with her politics nodded along. There was something raw and real in her voice, no script, no spin. Back home, Malik watched the clip on his phone. He didn't feel proud. He felt exposed. But when Ali came in and hugged him, saying, "You're famous now," he managed a small smile. That evening, their mom sat them down again. I've been asked to speak at a community forum next week, she said, about bias, safety, and how we treat each other. I'd like you both to come, not to speak unless you want to, but just to be there. Malik hesitated. Will she be there? He asked quietly. I don't know, his mom said, but if she is, we'll handle it with grace. Not because she deserves it, but because we choose to be better. Ali frowned. But she was mean. Yes, their mom agreed. But anger won't fix this. Understanding might. The next few days passed in a blur. Malik went back to school. Some kids clapped him on the back. Others avoided him, unsure what to say. His art teacher pulled him aside and said, if you ever want to turn your sketches into a statement, like a school exhibit, I'd support it. He thought about it. His mom met with police leadership. Not to accuse, but to listen. They discussed how 911 calls like this one, vague, fear-based, racially coded, tie up resources and erode trust. They agreed to review training protocols, especially around suspicious person reports. And then, on the fourth day, something unexpected happened. A handwritten letter arrived at the governor's office. No return address, just a plain envelope. Inside, on crisp stationery, it read, Dear Governor Johnson, I am the woman who called the police on your son at Heritage Park. I am writing to apologize, not for public show, but because I owe it to you and your family. I told myself I was being careful, but the truth is, I saw a black teenager alone and assumed the worst. I didn't consider that he might be a student, a brother, a son. I didn't consider him at all. Your words about saying hello instead of calling 911 have stayed with me. I've spent days ashamed, but also thinking. I've signed up for a community workshop on implicit bias. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope in time I can be someone who builds trust instead of fear. Please tell your son I'm sorry. And thank you for responding with dignity, not rage. A neighbor. The governor read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer. That night at dinner, she didn't mention the letter. But she looked at Malik and said, change starts small. Sometimes it starts with one person choosing to do better. He nodded. For the first time in days, he picked up his pencil and started sketching again. Not his sister this time, but a bench under an oak tree, empty, waiting. The days after the letter arrived felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but less sharp around the edges. At school, Malik noticed kids didn't stare as much. A few even asked if he was okay, not in a gossipy way, but like they genuinely cared. His art teacher hung one of his older sketches, a city skyline at sunset, in the hallway with a small note. Art sees what fear misses. It wasn't about the incident, but it felt like a quiet nod of support. At home, things settled into a new kind of normal. His little sister, Allie, started carrying a small notebook everywhere, scribbling down ideas to make the park better. She'd come up with wild plans like painting kindness quotes on benches or starting a buddy bench where kids could sit if they felt lonely. Their mom would smile and say, "That's a great idea, baby," and sometimes Malik caught her writing those ideas down in her own planner, like she might actually use them someday. But the outside world hadn't slowed down. The story kept growing. National news shows featured segments on racial profiling in everyday spaces: parks, coffee shops, college campuses. Community leaders held town halls. Even the police department released a statement saying they were reviewing how they respond to non-criminal suspicious person calls. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. Then came the invitation. It arrived on a Tuesday, slipped into the governor's official mail. A local community center, the Oak Ridge Unity Hub, wanted her to speak at a special evening event called Neighbors in Conversation. The flyer explained it was meant to be a space for honest, respectful dialogue about safety, belonging, and how to build trust across differences. And they'd specifically asked if her son would be willing to attend, not to speak, just to be present. Her first instinct was to say no. She didn't want Malik put on display again. But when she showed him the flyer, he surprised her. "I'll go," he said simply, flipping through his sketchbook. "If it helps someone else not feel like I did." She studied his face. He wasn't doing it for attention. He was doing it because he remembered the knot in his stomach when the officers approached, the way his sister's voice cracked when she yelled, "He's my brother." He didn't want another kid to feel that alone. So she said yes. The night of the event, the community center buzzed with energy. Folding chairs filled the main hall and people kept streaming in. Older couples, young parents with toddlers on their hips, teenagers in hoodies not unlike Malik's. Even a few uniformed officers standing near the back, arms crossed but faces open. There was no stage, just a circle of chairs in the center. The idea was to talk, not perform. Malik sat beside his mom. Allie curled up on her other side, clutching a stuffed dog she'd insisted on bringing for courage. He wore a plain black t-shirt and jeans, no hoodie this time, not because he was ashamed, but because he didn't want anyone to focus on what he was wearing instead of what was being said. The moderator, a soft-spoken woman who ran a local youth mentorship program, opened the floor. "Tonight isn't about blame," she said. "It's about listening, about asking hard questions, and about remembering that behind every headline is a human being." Then she turned to the governor. "Would you be willing to share what that day felt like for you as a mother?" The room went quiet. The governor took a breath. She didn't stand. She just leaned forward slightly, hands resting on her knees. "That morning I was in a meeting about education funding," she began, voice calm but thick with memory. "I got a text from Allie that said, 'Mom, come quick.' I didn't know why. But when I saw the park, saw my son standing there with 2 officers while my daughter cried. My heart stopped." She paused. "I've been stopped before, followed in stores, asked if I belonged at events I was hosting. But seeing it happen to my child, that's different. It's like watching someone you love be treated as invisible and dangerous at the same time." A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. "I didn't go there as governor," she continued. "I went there as a mom who just wanted to hold her kids and tell them they're safe. But the truth is, I couldn't promise that. Not fully, because the world doesn't always see them the way I do." Malik kept his eyes down, but his throat felt tight. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear her say that. After she finished, the moderator opened the floor to questions. Hands went up slowly. One man asked, "How do we stop this from happening again?" "Start small," the governor said. "If you see someone who looks out of place, ask yourself why that thought came up. Was it really about behavior or about race or age or how they dressed? And then, instead of calling 911, try walking over and saying, 'Beautiful day, isn't it?' Most people will smile back. And suddenly they're not a threat, they're a neighbor." A teenager raised his hand. "What if you're scared and you don't know how to tell if it's real fear or just bias?" "That's a great question," she said. "Real fear usually comes from something specific. A person trying a door, yelling aggressively, acting erratically. But if your fear is just a feeling based on how someone looks, that's bias, and we all have it. The key is to notice it, question it, and choose a different action. Then, from near the back, a quiet voice spoke. I called the police. Everyone turned. There, standing near the door, was the woman from the park. She looked smaller than Malik remembered, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She hadn't planned to speak. She'd come just to listen, but something about the governor's words, the honesty, the lack of anger, pushed her forward. I called 911 on your son, she said, voice trembling. I told myself I was protecting my neighborhood, but I was really just scared of what I didn't understand. I didn't see a boy waiting for his sister. I saw a stereotype, and I'm so sorry. The room was completely silent. Even Allie stopped fidgeting. The governor didn't stand. She just looked at the woman and said, "Thank you for saying that." No anger, no lecture. Just gratitude for the courage it took to admit it. The woman took a shaky breath. I've been going to a bias awareness group. I'm learning. It's hard, but I don't want to be the reason another kid feels like he doesn't belong in his own town. Malik finally looked up. He met her eyes for just a second. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. After the event, people milled around, talking in low voices. Some approached the governor to thank her. Others spoke to the woman, offering quiet words of support. One older black man shook her hand and said, "It takes guts to face this. Keep going." Malik stayed seated, sketching the scene, the circle of chairs, the soft lights, the way strangers were leaning in to listen to each other. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, unspoken hurts, years of mistrust. But for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, people were willing to try. On the drive home, Allie fell asleep in the back seat. Malik stared out the window. "Do you think she meant it?" he asked quietly. "I think she's trying," his mom said. "And trying matters," he nodded. "I used to think people like her would never change. Most won't if no one gives them a chance to," she said. "But some will, if they're willing to look in the mirror." The next morning, something unexpected happened at school. During lunch, a group of kids Malik barely knew came over to his table. One of them, a white boy from his history class, cleared his throat. "Hey," he said awkwardly, "I saw the news and I just wanted to say I'm sorry that happened. It's messed up." Malik was so surprised he almost dropped his fork. Thanks." The boy nodded, then added, "My mom called the cops once on a guy fixing his car in front of our house. He lived there. She just assumed. She feels awful about it now." Malik didn't know what to say, so he just said, "Yeah, it happens." But that small moment stuck with him. It wasn't an apology for the whole world, but it was real. That afternoon, his art teacher pulled him aside again. "The community center loved your mom's talk," she said. "They asked if you'd be willing to display some of your sketches at their youth art night next month. Just everyday scenes, your sister, the park, the city. They want to show beauty in the ordinary." Malik thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." At home, his mom was on a call with city officials. She was pushing for a pilot program, training 911 dispatchers to ask more specific questions when someone reports a suspicious person. Instead of just taking the call at face value, they'd be encouraged to ask, what is the person actually doing? And is there a specific threat? It wouldn't stop every biased call, but it might slow things down enough for reason to catch up with fear. Later that week, the governor's office announced the launch of a statewide listening tour. Community conversations on safety and belonging, starting in Oak Ridge. They'd visit towns big and small, holding open forums where residents could share their experiences, fears, and hopes. No politicians grandstanding, just people talking. The news coverage shifted. Less governor's son targeted, more state launches effort to address everyday bias. It wasn't flashy, but it was real work. And then, one rainy afternoon, a package arrived at the house. It was small, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a hardcover sketchbook, thick paper, smooth binding, and a note. For Malik, "May your pencil always find truth, beauty, and peace." A neighbor, no name. But he knew. He ran his fingers over the cover. It felt like a beginning. That night, he sat at the kitchen table and opened it to the first page. He didn't draw his sister this time. He drew the community center circle of chairs, empty but waiting. In the corner, he added two small figures, one tall, one small, walking toward it. His mom came in, poured herself a cup of tea, and stood behind him for a moment. "That's good," she said softly. He didn't look up. "It's not finished. I know," she said. "None of this is." But for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. Not with anger, not with blame, but with honesty, courage, and the quiet hope that people can change, if given the chance. The morning of the press conference felt different. Not tense, but purposeful. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving the streets glistening and the air crisp. Inside the state capitol building, staff moved quietly, setting up chairs in the garden courtyard where the governor had insisted the event be held. "No podiums," she'd said. "No barriers. Just people talking." Malik stood near the back, hands in his pockets, watching workers hang a simple banner that read, "Safety starts with understanding." He wasn't nervous exactly, but he felt the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just another statement. This was action. His mom had spent weeks meeting with police chiefs, community organizers, mental health advocates, and even a few retired officers known for pushing reform from within. They'd pored over data, listened to stories, and debated solutions that didn't just sound good but could actually work. No grand promises, no empty slogans, just practical steps born from real pain and real hope. Ali bounced beside him, holding a folder full of her kindness bench drawings. She'd been invited to sit with the youth representatives, kids from schools across the state who'd written letters about what safety meant to them. One girl had written, "Safety is knowing I won't be followed in the store because of my skin." Another boy said, "Safety is my brother coming home from the park without cops asking him why he's there." Now, as guests began to arrive, reporters, city council members, neighbors from Oak Ridge, even a few officers in plain clothes, Malik spotted her. The woman from the park? She stood near the edge of the courtyard wearing a simple blue coat, holding a small notebook. She didn't look at him. She just stood quietly like she wasn't sure she belonged. He almost looked away, but then he remembered the sketchbook she'd sent, the note, the way she'd stood up in the community circle and said those 3 hard words. "I called the police." So he gave her a small nod. Not a smile, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. She saw it. Her eyes widened slightly, then she nodded back. The governor stepped into the courtyard. She wore a soft gray suit, no tie, her hair loose. She didn't walk to a stage, there wasn't one. She simply stood in the center, microphone in hand, and waited for the murmuring to settle. "Thank you all for being here," she began, voice calm but carrying. "A few weeks ago, my son was sitting on a bench in Heritage Park, drawing his sister's soccer game. Someone saw him and called 911 saying he looked suspicious. 2 officers showed up. My son wasn't arrested. He wasn't hurt. But he was made to feel like he didn't belong, in his own neighborhood in broad daylight for doing nothing wrong." She paused. That moment could have ended there, but it didn't, because it's not just about one call. It's about a pattern where fear overrides curiosity, where difference is mistaken for danger, and where too many kids, especially black and brown kids, learn early that their presence alone can be seen as a threat. She looked around at the faces gathered, some familiar, some strangers, some skeptical. So we asked, what can we actually do? Then she laid it out. First, a new statewide guideline for 911 dispatchers. When someone reports a suspicious person, the dispatcher must ask specific questions. What is the person doing? Is there a visible weapon? Is anyone in immediate danger? Before sending officers. Vague calls like, "He looks out of place," won't automatically trigger a police response. Instead, non-emergency concerns will be routed to community safety teams, trained civilians who can check in, offer help, or de-escalate without uniforms or guns. Second, mandatory implicit bias training for all law enforcement recruits, and refresher courses for current officers, developed in partnership with psychologists and community leaders. Not just PowerPoint slides, but real scenarios, real conversations. Third, funding for safe spaces grants, money for parks, libraries, and community centers to host youth art programs, mentorship circles, and intergenerational dialogues, places where people can meet not as stereotypes, but as neighbors. And finally, she said, we're launching a pilot program right here in Oak Ridge, the Hello Initiative. Simple signs will go up in parks and public areas that say, "See someone new? Say hello." Not to force interaction, but to remind us that connection starts with a single word. She turned slightly and gestured to the back. This isn't my plan. It came from teachers, officers, parents, teens, even someone who once made a call out of fear and now wants to help build something better. All eyes turned to the woman in the blue coat. She didn't step forward, but she didn't hide either. She just stood there, tears in her eyes, nodding slowly. A reporter raised a hand. "Is this the Heritage Park Reform Act people are calling it?" The governor smiled faintly. "We're calling it the Community Trust Act, because that's what we're trying to rebuild. Trust that safety isn't just about policing, but about belonging." After the press conference, people lingered. Some approached the governor to thank her. Others spoke to the woman not with anger but with quiet respect. One older man said, "My grandson got stopped last year for walking home from the library. Thank you for saying this out loud." Malik stayed near the edge, sketching the scene, the mix of uniforms and hoodies, suits and sneakers all standing together under the same sky. He didn't feel like a symbol anymore. He just felt like himself. Later that afternoon, his mom asked if he'd be willing to meet with the woman privately. "Not to make you uncomfortable," she said, but she asked. She wants to apologize properly. Malik thought about it. He remembered the fear in her voice at the community event. The way she'd looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, not as a threat, but as a person. "Okay," he said, "but only if Allie comes too." So they met in a quiet corner of the Capitol garden away from cameras and crowds. The woman arrived with a small potted plant, a peace lily, its white bloom just opening. "I know sorry doesn't fix what happened," she said, hands trembling slightly as she held it out. "But I want you to know I see you now. Not just as the governor's son, but as Malik, the artist, the brother, the kid who was just waiting for his sister." Allie took the plant before Malik could react. "It's pretty," she said simply. Malik looked at the woman. "Why did you come today?" "Because I realized something," she said. "I spent my whole life thinking I was protecting my community. But real protection isn't about calling the police on people who look different. It's about making sure everyone feels safe, including them." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just stood there open and honest. Malik took a breath. "I don't want you to feel bad forever," he said slowly. "But I need you to remember this, so you never do it again." "I will," she promised. "Every time I see a kid sitting alone, I'll think of you. And I'll choose to say hello," he nodded. That was enough. That evening, the family sat on their porch, the peace lily on the small table between them. Fireflies blinked in the dusk. Allie chattered about how she wanted to put a hello sign in her school hallway. Their mom sipped tea, quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You handled that really well today." Malik shrugged. "I just told the truth. That's the hardest thing sometimes," she said, "and the most powerful." Over the next few weeks, the Community Trust Act moved quickly through the legislature. It wasn't perfect. Some lawmakers pushed back, saying it tied officers' hands, but public support was strong. Even police unions, after initial hesitation, agreed to pilot the dispatcher guidelines, saying, "We'd rather respond to real emergencies than baseless fears." In Oak Ridge, the first hello signs went up in Heritage Park, bright yellow, friendly font. Kids pointed them out during soccer games. Parents smiled when they saw them. The woman from the park started volunteering with the new community safety team. She wasn't in charge, just a listener, a greeter, someone who showed up at park events and made sure no one sat alone. She still felt nervous sometimes, but she kept showing up. Malik's art was featured at the youth night at the community center. His sketches, of his sister, the empty bench, the circle of chairs, hung on the wall beside poems and paintings from other kids. A local paper ran a small feature. Through a teen's pencil, a town reimagined safety. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, ran up to him holding a drawing of her own. "I drew you," she said proudly. It showed a boy with a sketchbook under a tree, sunlight around him, and a speech bubble that said, "Hi." He laughed. "That's really good," she beamed. "My mom says you helped make the park nicer." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just said, "Thanks." Back at home, his mom was on the phone, finalizing details for the first stop on the statewide listening tour. a small town 2 hours away where a black college student had recently been followed by store security for no reason. She hung up and looked at him. "You ready to keep going?" she asked. He thought about the little girl's drawing, the peace lily blooming on their porch, the way the woman now waved when she saw him at the park, not nervously but warmly. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready, because this wasn't over." But for the first time, it felt like they weren't just reacting to pain. They were building something new, one honest conversation, one act of courage, one simple hello at a time. A year had passed since that Saturday in Heritage Park, and the bench under the old oak tree looked different now, not because it had been replaced, but because it was rarely empty. On most afternoons, you'd find someone sitting there, a teenager reading, an older couple sharing a thermos of coffee, a group of kids laughing over a board game someone had left behind. A small yellow sign hung from the branch above it. "See someone new? Say hello." And somehow people did. The change hadn't happened overnight. It wasn't magic. It was the slow, steady work of people choosing to do things differently, starting with a single call that went wrong, and the courage it took to make it right. Malik was now 17. Taller, quieter in a way that wasn't sadness but thoughtfulness. He still carried his sketchbook everywhere, though these days it was the new one, the one with the smooth cover and thick paper. Inside, the drawings had shifted. Less about what was taken from him, more about what was being built. He'd sketched the first hello sign going up in the park. He'd drawn his little sister standing on a stool to hang one in her school hallway. He'd even captured the moment the woman from the park, now a regular at community cleanup days, handed a water bottle to a tired volunteer. Her face relaxed in a way he'd never seen before. He'd started a club at school called Common Ground. It wasn't political, not really. Just a space where kids could talk. About race, yes, but also about loneliness, pressure, what it felt like to be seen or unseen. They hosted art nights, invited guest speakers, and once organized a neighbor walk, where students paired up with seniors to walk around the neighborhood and just talk, no agenda, just connection. His mom still carried the weight of her office, but there was a new lightness in her step. The Community Trust Act had passed statewide, and while it wasn't a cure-all, it had sparked real change. Dispatch centers reported a 30% drop in vague, suspicious person calls in pilot cities. Community safety teams, made up of social workers, retired teachers, and trained volunteers, were handling low-level concerns without police involvement. And in schools across the state, hello signs were popping up along with student-led kindness campaigns. But the biggest shift wasn't in policy. It was in posture. People looked at each other differently now. Not perfectly, not always, but more often than before. One warm Saturday, almost exactly a year after the incident, Heritage Park hosted its first Together Day. It wasn't a protest or a rally, just a celebration. Food trucks, live music from local high school bands, art stations, and a big community mural being painted on a blank wall near the soccer fields. The theme? We belong here. Malik stood near the mural helping younger kids dip brushes into bright paint. Allie was in charge of the kindness notes table, where people wrote messages on colored paper and tied them to a string that stretched across 2 trees. One note read, "Thank you for smiling at me yesterday." Another said, "I used to be scared of people who looked different. Now I ask their name." His mom arrived mid-morning, not in a suit, but in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She didn't give a speech. She just grabbed a brush and joined the mural team, painting a sun in the corner with careful strokes. Nearby, the woman who'd made the call a year ago stood at a folding table, handing out lemonade. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wore a volunteer t-shirt that said, "Oak Ridge Together," and she greeted people by name, kids, parents, even a few officers who'd come off duty to help. When she saw Malik, she didn't rush over. She just caught his eye and gave a small, steady wave. He waved back. Later, as the sun began to dip low, casting golden light over the park, the governor walked over to the old oak tree. She sat on the bench and patted the space beside her. Malik came and sat down, sketchbook in hand. "You've been quiet today," she said. "Just watching," he said. "It's nice. Feels real." "It is real," she said. "Because it's built by real people, not just laws, but choices." He flipped open his sketchbook to a fresh page. "I've been thinking about applying to art school next year." She smiled. "I'd love that." I don't want to just draw what's wrong, he said slowly. I want to draw what's possible. She looked out at the park, the music, the laughter, the mural half finished but full of color. You already are. That evening, as families packed up and the last notes of the band faded into the twilight, Malik stayed behind to help clean up. He gathered stray paintbrushes, folded chairs, picked up crumpled napkins. As he walked toward the trash bin, he passed the bench again. Someone had left a single sketch on the seat, a quick pencil drawing of two hands shaking, one young, one older, with the words "Thank you for listening" written underneath. He didn't know who drew it. Maybe a kid from his club. Maybe someone who'd been stopped once and never spoken up until now. He tucked it into his sketchbook, right behind the drawing of the empty bench from last year. Back at home, Allie was already asleep, her kindness notes folder open on her desk. Their mom sat at the kitchen table, reviewing notes for the next stop on the listening tour, a town where a new community garden was being built on land once used for racial segregation. She looked up as Malik came in. Long day? She asked. Good day, he said, pouring a glass of water. She nodded. You know, I used to think change had to come from the top, from laws, from speeches, from power. And now? He asked, leaning against the counter. Now I know it starts right here, she said, tapping the table between them. In kitchens, on benches, in conversations where people choose to see each other instead of fear each other. He smiled faintly. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The next week, Malik's Common Ground Club partnered with the local library to host a youth art exhibit titled Everyday Belonging. His sketches were there, alongside photos, poems, and paintings from dozens of kids. One piece showed a grocery store aisle with the caption, "This is where my mom taught me to hold my receipt until I got to the car." Another was a comic strip of a boy walking home, imagining what people thought of him, then turning to say hi to a neighbor and being met with a smile. A local news crew came to cover it. They asked Malik what he hoped people would take away. I hope they see that we're all just people, he said, looking straight into the camera. No script, no pretense. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say hello to someone who looks different from you. The story aired that night. Not as a sensational headline, but as a quiet reminder. Change isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a sketchbook on a bench, a peace lily on a porch, a lemonade stand run by someone who once called 911 out of fear, but now shows up with cups and kindness. Months later, when the state legislature gathered to renew funding for the Community Trust Act, they didn't just vote, they shared stories. An officer spoke about how the new dispatcher guidelines helped him respond to a real crisis instead of a false alarm. A teacher described how her students now check in on each other during lunch, and a teenager, nervous but determined, read a letter from a kid who finally felt safe walking to the park alone. The bill passed unanimously. That same week, Malik received his acceptance letter to an art school known for its social justice focus. His portfolio had included the Heritage Park sketches, the before and the after. The admissions officer later told him, "Your art doesn't just show the world as it is. It shows us how to heal it." He didn't tell many people at first, but when he finally showed his mom, she hugged him tight and whispered, "You're going to change more than just canvases." Now, on quiet weekends, Malik still goes to Heritage Park. Sometimes he sketches, sometimes he just sits. And more often than not, someone joins him. Another teen, a neighbor, even a curious little kid who asks, "Can you draw me?" He always says yes, and every time before he starts, he looks up, smiles, and says, "Hi," because that's where it all began. Not with a call to the police, but with the choice to see someone as human. And that's where it continues, one hello at a time.